Good morning, Bridge family. How are you today? Good. Yeah, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do it like that. I am nervous, so I might talk a little bit quick. My name is Phil Goodwin. I've been coming to the Bridge for about 7 years. For those of you that know me, when I tell a story that goes from A to B, it's more like A, A1, A2, C, G, M, back to B. And you're like, what? You could have just went like this, Phil. You didn't have to tell us all this extra stuff. So we could be here a little late today. Like I said, I'm nervous. I might talk quick, so we could get out early as well. You're not getting out early. So who knows? What I was going to talk about today, my testimony, I decided to call Steps. I was thinking about this message that Dave Fox did a few years ago, and he was talking about marriage and adultery. And the analogy he used was he talked about nobody just wakes up one day and says, I'm going to have an affair today. Instead, they're here in their marriage. They start doing things they shouldn't. They start watching pornography, talking to somebody they shouldn't talk to, start putting themselves in bad situations. And all of a sudden down here, and how did I get here? Slowly, they walked away. And that's what I'm going to talk about, how I slowly walked away from my faith and how I came back to my faith because of people that were pushing me back a step at a time to come back. The Bridge has asked me the last few years a handful of times to preach, and I would talk to my wife, I would talk to my spiritual leaders and friends that I knew, and at the end of the day, I would always come up with a reason that it wasn't right time or whatever. But this time, about a month ago, when they asked me, I decided to do something a little bit different. I didn't talk to my wife. I didn't talk to anybody else about it. I just decided I'm going to pray and listen for God directly tell me something. So after about a week, we come into the Bridge for service on Sunday. I wasn't getting anything. Eric came and talked to me, and I told him, yeah, I'll probably just call Dave this afternoon and let him know I'm not preaching this time either. Later that afternoon, me and my wife are in our family room, and we're talking about the night before. I was a little tired, so I went to bed early, and she came in soon after and was rubbing my hair and holding my hand, and I fell asleep. But what she was telling me that in the family room was, while she was doing that, she was praying over me. And what she was praying was that the next time I got asked to preach, I would know I'm supposed to start and that God was going to make it clear to me that this was the time to get started. And I sat there and just kind of laughed and said, guess what Dave Fox asked me a week ago? He asked me to preach. And I think I have my answer now. So I let him know the next day I was in, and he said, preach on whatever you want. We're here for you to support you and help you with whatever you need. So I did get a little bit anxious, and my mind works a little, it's all images and stories is how my brain works. And I kept remembering Philippians, where Paul's talking about, if I can get some help here, there we go. Talk about being anxious. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. It's a very important verse to me because I do overthink a lot and I get anxious about things. But there's been big points in my life where the peace of God, I feel it, and it surpasses that understanding that we can't understand everything. So as the days went on, and I thought, what should I talk about? Another image kept coming to mind. And funnily enough, I've actually never read this book. It's called The Story by the NIV. It's just a loose book of biblical stories that just make it easy to read. And I was trying to figure out what God was wanting me to talk about, and I realized he wants me to share my story of what he's done for me in my life. And so that's where it brings me to the beginning of what I'm going to talk about today. I was 10 years old, and my family was moving to Bern. We did not have a family connection here. And my dad had this habit, when we'd be coming back from a vacation or a long road trip, he liked to roll his window down when we got into our hometown so we could smell our fresh hometown air. And I'll never forget coming down 27, and he rolled down that window and like a punch in the face. I was like, what is that? Is it whatever's out on the fields they're putting? Is it what the buggies are leaving behind on the road? And my dad just laughed and told us, don't worry, you'll eventually get used to it. So I started school, I made friends, and one of the first things I started to notice about this community, which I thought was really cool, is a lot of people here were related. A lot of my friends went to school with their cousins, their aunt and uncles also lived here, their grandparents lived here, and that was just something I never had growing up in my life. We always lived a little bit farther away from family, so I wasn't as close and I didn't get to see them as often. So going into junior high, joined campus life. Eric Lehman is actually my leader at that point when I was in campus life. And I would say I kind of had a typical Christian upbringing. My parents were both believers, thankfully, and instilled some good things in me about what it means to be a believer in Jesus. In high school, my goal was always to be like my grandpa Walter. He was a Wesleyan pastor, and I always wanted to be a pastor and follow in his footsteps and share the gospel with people. And then one Saturday, when I was 16 years old, we got news that totally changed my life and the trajectory of where I was going. My brother was home that weekend. He was a little bit older, and he was at Ball State, and he didn't come home a lot on weekends. My parents asked me and my younger sister to go to our rooms for a little bit, and they went downstairs with our two pastors from First Missionary Church and my brother for a while. Eventually, they came and got us, and we go downstairs, and we're sitting on the couch, and they start to tell us what was going on. Our older brother had been sick, and they were trying to figure out what was happening. And they finally knew, and because of what was going on, there was very limited medical treatments he could have. They found out he had a tumor in his brain, and it was located between his brainstem and his brain. Your brainstem sits up underneath your brain, and the tumor was growing in between there. So surgery was out because the surgery would probably kill him before anything else would. So I didn't know what to do. We prayed. I just went back up to my room, and I just remember starting to get really angry at God because it didn't make a lot of sense. My brother's a good guy. He's never done anything. He doesn't drink. He doesn't party. Why is he being punished? And that was the first step I took that started to lead me away from my faith. And I got to see something really cool, though, about this community. People would stop by every few days and drop off meals. They would check on my parents and me and my sister and my brother, asking if there was anything else they could do for us. They put together a benefit to help raise money because his treatments were so expensive. And it was cool to see how, although we'd only been here for a few short years, we were accepted like we were family and we'd lived here our whole lives. And as the months went on, we started to notice Ben was feeling better, and they did some more scans, and it turns out the cancer was shrinking. And I was like, oh, I understand the plan now. God's going to heal him. This makes complete sense. He's going to be completely healed. The tumor shrank all the way down to the size of a period at the end of a sentence. That's how small it got. Life started going back to normal. My brother went back to school and graduated from Ball State with his bachelor's degree. I changed my degree from ministry at that point to education because I just didn't want to deal with God still at that point. And as the years went on, me and Ben were talking about what it would be like to grow up with our kids here in the town, that they could grow up together and how cool it would be to see our kids become cousins and close with each other. And he started to get sick again. And this time they told us the chemotherapy wouldn't work this time since it didn't work the whole way the last time. There's going to just basically pump him full of radiation. And hopefully it kills the cancer before it kills your brother. So that summer, I had turned 21. I was living down in Destin, Florida with some family friends in between semesters at college to earn money. My whole family came down for a week to stay with us, actually. And it was really cool to see. My brother was a big guy. He was 6'2", 6'3", and he was always lanky until he had to start taking all this terrible medication. But he got to walk on his own power for the last time in the pool because the tumor pushed on him. He was pushing on his brain and everything. He didn't have a lot of control over his body. So my family goes home after a week, and then a few weeks later, I get a call from my mom, and she is just in pure panic. And she says, your dad is with your brother at the hospital getting his radiation treatment. I need you to get home immediately. He's about to pass out. I don't know what's going on with your dad. So I pack up everything in cardboard boxes, ship it back to Indiana. I go say goodbye to the friends I had made down there, and I fly back home immediately. My dad ended up being okay. He just had a kidney stone. I don't mean just had a kidney stone. I've had a couple, and they are absolutely terrible. But he was okay. My dad was living at home as well at this time to help take care of my brother. We used to joke about the differences in how we looked because my brother was tall, he had black hair, and he was skinny. People would get us confused. I'm not that tall. I'm definitely not skinny, and I don't have black hair. So I used to say he was Schwarzenegger and I was DeVito from that old movie Twins, if you remember that. But one night, my mom asked me to help out with something for my brother. My dad had went to bed already, and so I went out and helped him out. And like I said, he couldn't control a lot of his body. He couldn't talk real well either. So I helped him out, and I told him, "I love you, buddy." And he said so clearly, "I love you too, brother." And that was the last thing we said to each other. I went down to Indianapolis to go visit a friend. And 2 mornings later, I get a phone call from my mom again telling me, "I need to come back home immediately. Your brother has started his death rattle." For those of you that don't know what it is, I hope you never have to hear it. When someone's at the end of their life, the doctors were telling us his body is going to become so weak, and his airways are going to slowly fill with fluid, and his body is not going to be strong enough to push that fluid out anymore. And you just have to sit there and listen to it. They did tell us he won't be in any pain. He's probably not going to really be conscious at this point either. So I fly home from the south side of Indianapolis in about an hour and a half. I was driving very recklessly. But I really wanted to see my brother one more time. So I got home. I hugged my mom, my dad, and my sister probably harder than ever before. And we gathered around my brother's bed, which was in our family room the last few months of his life. My mom was standing at his head. My dad and sister were across from me. My grandfather was down at his feet. And we just listened as he slowly took less and less breaths until finally he didn't take another one. And it got so quiet at that point. We knew what had just happened. We all start crying. But I felt this hand on my shoulder. And I felt this weird peace kind of come over me. And as I turned to look and see, there was nobody there and the hand had disappeared. And I thought that was kind of strange. So we have the funeral for my brother. My family ends up moving away. My dad got another job in Ohio, and so my family moved away. I continued to live how I shouldn't have been living, partying. I just wanted to serve myself. I didn't really care about anything at this point with God. I was so mad. It didn't make sense. How could he do this? He's supposed to be fair and just. This was unfair. This was unjust. And I just kept getting reminded of Proverbs, some really good wisdom in the Old Testament. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. And I was not doing that. I wanted to get away from Bern. I wanted to go where nobody knew who I was. So I had a friend that was living in Long Island just outside of New York City and asked if I could move out there and live with him. And he said, absolutely. So I moved out there, kept taking more steps away from God. At this point, not even really believing if he was real, because if he was, why would he do that to my brother and my family? It didn't make any sense. As I was out there for some time, though, I heard through the grapevine about this girl that happened to be single. And this was the girl I always thought about, and I knew this was the one. So I called her, convinced her to come out so I could show her New York City. She came out for a few days. She went back home to Indiana. I told my roommate, I'm probably not going to be here much longer. I have to go see where that goes. So I moved back to Ohio to live with my family until I could find any job in Bern that would afford me an apartment and so I could be closer to her. We start dating. She's my wife now. It's Channing. Thankfully, she was always tethered to the Lord. I continued to live how I shouldn't have been living. And as our relationship grew on, I knew I needed to mature and quit doing some of these things, and we got engaged. We also got married by Rocky Evans, another spiritual leader of mine, who would always remind me that even in bad times, God will always be there for us. After we were married, my wife would ask and suggest that we go to church, and I would come up with reasons and excuses we didn't need to go to church. I would say we can just read our Bible at home, we can watch YouTube. We don't need to go to church. It's okay. But then a few years go by and we have our first son, Bennett. And I thought, you know what? It probably wouldn't be a bad idea to go to church. He can at least hear some good stories and morals, and it'll help him become a good person. But this was the first step of getting pushed back to finding my faith. We started hanging out with different friends as well. And when we'd come to the bridge, what I would do is I'd bring my Bible so it looked like I was paying attention, but I was just reading old stories. And my favorite one I used to read over and over was of Samson. Samson got to be really strong. I just think that's awesome. I'm a guy. I think guys want to be strong. And he also killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. Awesome. God told him to do it. But my favorite part about Samson is at the end of his story, at Judges 15:20, it says that he judged Israel in the days of the Philistine 20 years. And the reason I love that so much is because Samson broke his promises to God. He didn't fulfill everything he was wanting to do with God, but God still chose him to be the leader of his people for 20 years, even though he had all those shortcomings. So as we're attending church more and more, we start hanging out with different friends back from high school that were still believers, had kids around the same age of our kid. And one of them asked me to come to this small groups one time. And instead of telling him at that point, I don't really believe in God right now, I said, okay, sure, I'll come check it out sometime. So I remember the first time I went, I didn't really know everybody there. I knew a few of the guys, but I didn't know everybody. And I just listened, and it was incredible to hear these guys share this story of their faith, what they were going through, how they would just go pray for people. And it just kind of seemed crazy to me, even though I grew up in this Christian family and had family of pastors. I'd never really heard about this before and saw men with this type of faith. So after about 5 to 6 weeks of coming into the small group, I was starting to have some curiosity grow a little bit about maybe God is real, because these guys seem to sure as believe he is. But I thought, these guys are really far ahead of my faith where I'm at. This is going to be my last night here. I'm not going to come back to this group. I'll find somebody else a little bit more my pace and do some of my own research. That night, one of the guys invited his father-in-law to come and speak to us. And he was talking about how they do things in their small group. And one of the things he wanted to do for us is he wanted us to pray with him. He wanted us to put our hands out. And he said he was going to pray that God would put spiritual gifts in our hands. And I thought, okay, perfect. Here you go, God. Here's your chance. I'll put my hands out. And if I feel you place a spiritual gift in my hand, I'll know you're real. I'm back 100% ready to go. So we start praying for a few minutes, and I'm just hoping I feel and place something in my hand, and I get nothing. And I kind of have the thought of, yeah, that's kind of what I thought. They also did something, if somebody was wanting some prayer, if they were going some tough time, they had this side table they would bring out and sit in the middle. They called it the hot seat. They would sit him down, and they would gather around with their hands on his shoulders and his arms, and they would start praying for him. And there was a guy leaving to go to Colorado because the God was asking him to. And he was taking his wife and kids and moving far away because that's what God wanted him to do. It was incredible faith. So I figured I should at least stand there to make it look like I'm doing something. And as I'm standing there, Michael Winger standing on the side of me and Dave Burson on this side. And Mike's trying to get Dave's attention. And he's saying, we need to pray for Phil. We need to pray for Phil. So we asked the guy to get up, and they say, Phil, would you be willing to sit down and let us pray over you? And I said, sure. Kind of caught me off guard, but that's fine. So I sit down. They place their hands on my shoulders, my arms, and my head. And immediately I'm back at my brother's bedside. And I can start to feel that peace again. And I remember that hand that had touched my shoulder at that time. Mike starts praying. And he says, God, I know Phil's doubting you and that you're real. And I want him to know that you love him so much and that you care about him. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was crying way more than this. And there was no way Mike could know those things. I never shared those things. I didn't tell anybody. There was only one way he knew, and it was if God was telling him that's what I needed to hear at that point. So I stood up and was hugging all these guys. I couldn't believe what just happened. I was so glad God had been pushing these people in my life, and this group of men was not afraid to be embarrassed and share their faith with me. So I immediately wanted to get into a small group or a Bible study and get back into the Word. So I joined the men's Wednesday morning Bible study here at the Bridge. And soon after I joined, they told us about this guy who was moving back to Texas, from Texas back to Bern. He was an attorney. He was a teacher at a seminary. And another cool connection is the reason he was moving back to Bern is he bought the guy's house that had moved to Colorado that night. And he came in and he sat down and he opened his Bible, and I'll never forget this. I started laughing because it looked like hieroglyphics to me. And I knew it wasn't hieroglyphics. I assumed it was Greek. And I was like, if this guy is reading the Greek Bible, he knows the Bible pretty well. So I leaned over and asked him, are you reading the Greek Bible? And he goes, yeah, it's the Greek Bible. It was Trace Howard, one of the teachers here now. We went out to lunch soon after, and he became another spiritual mentor for me, encouraging me to get stronger in my faith and stronger rooted, how to read the Bible in context, how to study it correctly, and really kickstarted my passion and fire that I have for apologetics. So we go through a few years. My wife and I start volunteering a lot more at the Bridge and becoming way more involved. She still helps out in the nursery. We both led a few Wednesday night Bible studies. I led a few Wednesday night Bible services. We both had never been baptized, so we invited close family and friends over to get baptized. And that's Michael Winger, baptizing my wife at our house. He was the chaplain at her company. So we both had a connection to him. And here he is baptizing me at our house as well. And it was just a good day celebration. So another few years go by, and we have Gideon, our second child. It's 2021, and winter's coming, and my parents come over for Christmas, and we have a blast. And it was fun seeing the difference your parents are when they become grandparents. And I tried to tell my kids they weren't always this nice. But they head out to Charlotte to go visit my sister and my niece and nephew and her husband and have Christmas out there. And they all get COVID and they all get better within a day or two. But something we start to notice is my mom's not getting better. We kind of chalk it up to she had breast cancer about 12 years before, and she had diabetes now, so her immune system's going to be a little weaker. It'll take her a little bit longer to get better. And as she kept getting worse, they started to do more testing to figure out what was going on. And February 15th, 2022, it was President's Day. The place I work was closed. I was spending it with one of my friends from the small group who was going through some tough time. And we were just having a good day of brotherhood and building each other up as God tells us to. And I get a text from my mom. She said, I need you to call me. We finally found out what's wrong. And we just need to talk. So I get home and call my mom. And she starts telling me that they finally figured it out. Her breast cancer has returned. But it's in her liver and it's in her bones. I didn't know that was possible. And she starts to say the doctor's telling her about 30 days. And I go, what 30 days? Like 30 days to get the medication going, 30 days to get the treatment going, 30 days for what? And she said, no, the doctor said best case scenario, I have 30 days left to live. And again, I get this crushing news about somebody in my family being taken away. But now that I'm rooted in my faith, I'm not just mad at God and saying, what are you doing now? I start to think about the world we live in is not our home. This is our temporary home, and this flesh will go away. And 30 days later, I get a phone call from my dad that my mom has passed away. And she went home to be with her dad and her son. And I try to remember about Trace's message where he talked about we live in an evil world. It's imperfect. We're not going to understand everything, and it's difficult. But I remember when Paul talks in Romans, and we know for that those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Meaning God can take terrible things and he can make good things out of them. And I remembered back when my brother got sick, how this community came together and supported me and my family. And it's why I want to live here still today. It's why I want my kids to grow up here, because of the people that were here and took care of us. I saw my dad go from more of just a strict authority figure to more of a caring, loving, affectionate father. I saw him change and become a better husband for my mom. Teachers at school when I was in high school would pull me out of class and ask if I was okay, if there was anything they could do to help out, if I just needed to talk to somebody, they were there for me. And I just started to remember how God put these people in our lives that can help make things better. And as I was thinking about my testimony and how to wrap it up, because it's just a story to me, I mean, it's my life, it's today, here's the end, I'm here. I was trying to think about how this would apply for the believers. And I just hope that it's a story of encouragement and confidence to know that whatever terrible things have happened in your life, God can make beautiful things happen out of them. And that also, if you feel God prodding you along to do something, that you listen to him and don't be afraid to be embarrassed. Don't be afraid of what might happen. That night, Michael prayed for me. He could have been afraid to say, I don't want to ask Phil to sit down and pray. I don't want to say that, but he did. He trusted God, and he spoke exactly what I needed to hear, to know God was real and that he loved me and that he cared for me. And I kept seeing another image. I didn't want to put up another image again, but it was Jesus knocking at a door. It was a red door, old wood door, and it had these big brown stones around it. And I knew immediately what God was wanting me to talk about at the end. Revelation 3:20, this is Jesus talking, and he says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he with me." So if you're here today and you're not a believer, I want you to know God is at your heart. He's at your door, and he's knocking, and he wants to be a part of your life. And he wants to wash away all that sin and terrible things and let you know that he cares about you and that he loves you. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned from God, and as my faith has matured, is that we can plan out our lives and think it's perfect and this is the way it's going to go and this is the plan. This is great. But God's plan will differ at times. It's just going to. But every time, God's plan will always be better. It will always be better than anything you're planning. It may not seem like it at that time, but God's plan will always be better than what you're planning. And if you make that decision today to be a believer, I hope you would let somebody here know, somebody on staff or me, so we can celebrate and knowing that our family in heaven is growing and getting bigger, and that we can help you and help guide you along to enjoy your life more with Christ. So I'll let the band come up and I'll pray. And it is a little early, I guess. So not bad, I guess. Dear Jesus, just thank you for this time and for this community and this family. Thank you for everything you've done for me and the family you've provided. And just thank you for this opportunity to speak to the congregation today in this church and how awesome this church is and the things they've done to help me and my family. Just thank you for everything you've done for us. Amen.